Protecting Moscow by stripping air defense away from the men actually fighting this war sounds like the kind of decision no rational commander would ever make, but that's exactly the gamble Vladimir Putin is making right now. The Kremlin has ordered the withdrawal of critical air defense systems from Ukraine's front lines in order to turn Moscow itself into a fortress. And once you understand why he's doing it and what it costs him to do it, you'll understand why this single decision might be the most revealing thing to come out of the Kremlin in months. If that's the kind of analysis you're here for, hit subscribe now, because this one goes deep. Here's where this starts. Recent Ukrainian strikes have punched deep into the capital, hitting strategic targets like the oil refinery at Kapotnya. That single facility supplies roughly 40% of Moscow's diesel and gasoline, and it's also one of the most critical logistical hubs pumping fuel directly into Russia's frontline war machine. Putin knows exactly what kind of fuel bottleneck is coming. But here's the problem. Hastily pulling shields off the front line and rushing them to Moscow does not actually fix this. It just patches one side of the war while leaving the other side completely exposed. And it's not like Ukraine won't notice. A sharp spike in Ukrainian drone strikes against exactly the areas these systems are being pulled from is basically guaranteed. For a former intelligence officer like Putin, missing a dilemma, this obvious seems almost impossible. Which tells you something important. The real fear driving this decision isn't tactical, it's political. Here's what's actually happening. The perceptual cost of these strikes has now outpaced whatever weakness they create on the Ukrainian front, because in recent days, Ukraine's repeated, almost mocking drone strikes on Moscow have completely upended the balance of this war psychologically. The image of massive fuel tanks burning, their lids blown clean off just 15 kilometers from the Kremlin, that has badly damaged the invincibility and security narrative Putin has spent years constructing. Frontline losses stay abstract statistics for most Russians. Smoke rising over the capital does not. That's a direct, visceral source of fear, and it produces far more violent shockwaves than anything happening on the battlefield itself. That's the real reason Putin is willing to pull air defense off the front, to stop the perception that he can't even protect Moscow. Reports indicate the systems being pulled are Pantsir units, taken specifically from the hottest sectors, Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia, because that's where the largest concentration of rotational air defense assets has been sitting recently, especially as fighting pushes south from Donetsk. If air defense is meaningfully withdrawn from the Zaporizhzhia front, an estimated 80 to 120,000 Russian troops stationed there will be left directly exposed to aerial threats. Without short to medium-range systems like the Pantsir in place, these troops become largely defenseless against Ukraine's FPV kamikaze drones and fiber-optic-guided attacks. Since a large share of these troops are serving in assault groups across the southern sectors, logistics convoys and artillery batteries out there become highly vulnerable too. A vulnerability at this scale raises real risk of morale collapse and operational paralysis inside Russian command. And the Kremlin appears to be disregarding all of that risk entirely. These systems aren't just being loaded onto trucks and driven toward the Moscow ring road in the open. Reports indicate they're carrying frontline battle damage with them. Leaked reports even claim that during these covert transfers, some heavy launchers have been smuggled into the city hidden inside civilian train cars or commercial cargo trucks. Think about what that actually says. The fact that Russia feels the need to disguise its own equipment moving through its own domestic rail network tells you how deeply insecure its own military intelligence feels right now, even at home. One newly installed Pantsir system, positioned just a few hundred meters from the Kapotnya refinery, was examined in detail by the Telegraph. It still had the improvised anti-drone cages soldiers weld onto frontline systems welded onto it, metal grids you never see on standard Moscow-based systems. That's the clearest piece of physical evidence that this exact system was urgently pulled straight from combat. So will any of this actually protect Moscow, or has Putin just made his biggest mistake of the war? Let's look at what full protection of the capital actually requires, and how far short the current setup falls. Moscow's defensive ring was built on the bones of old S-25 Berkut missile bases dating back to the Soviet Union, meaning Russia chose to build its capital's shield on Cold War infrastructure rather than build something new. This layered, nested defense doctrine has been marketed for years as an impenetrable fortress. But recent intelligence leaked by Robert Brovdy, commander of Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, paints a very different picture of what this steel dome actually looks like. According to Brovdy's figures, more than 100 heavy launchers, S-300 and S-400 batteries, are currently on duty around the capital, but the area they're supposed to cover is so massive that the gaps between systems function like open highways for Ukrainian drones. On top of those heavy launchers, roughly 50 mobile Pantsir systems protect the city, arranged across 3 defensive rings: outer, middle, and inner. And even the electronic warfare networks meant to back all of this up are effectively blinding themselves because of the sheer volume of civilian signal pollution inside a city this size. Moscow's own cell towers and television broadcast frequencies are unintentionally acting like camouflage for Ukraine's incoming drones. Solving that problem, and actually building the shield Putin wants, looks close to impossible. Military analysts estimate pulling somewhere between 30 and 70 additional systems from the front might get Moscow closer to real protection, and the majority of those would need to be short-range Pantsir-class systems specifically. But Russia's annual production capacity for the Pantsir is only around 30 units a year. A meaningful chunk of that 30 gets scrapped straight off the production line due to technical failures and chip embargoes. And of the ones that do work, Ukrainian Special Forces ambush tactics are picking off a portion of those during transport before they ever reach the front. In other words, the number of systems Moscow actually needs to secure itself represents years of Russia's limited defense production capacity all at once. Since May, the Kremlin has taken additional, far if clearly insufficient, steps to try and close this gap. During that stretch, massive Mi-26 military transport helicopters became a constant fixture in Moscow's skies, lowering multi-ton Pantsir systems directly onto the rooftops of luxury residential towers and skyscrapers. These rooftop deployments, which visibly altered the city's skyline, were meant to intercept drones sneaking in at low altitude. But even that hasn't been enough, because systems mounted on fixed rooftop positions lose their mobility entirely and become static, predictable targets. Those steel masses sitting on rooftops have effectively turned luxury apartment buildings into open targets rather than protected ones. And here's the detail that makes it even worse: an ammunition shortage. A standard 6-missile Pantsir battery was found carrying only 2 intercept missiles loaded. Having a shortfall like that on an air defense system is basically the equivalent of going to war with a rifle that has no bullets in it. Quick pause. If the technical breakdown behind these numbers is exactly what you come here for, drop a comment and subscribe, because the next part is where this whole picture really clicks into place. Here's the harder truth underneath all of it. Even if Putin crowds every single one of these systems into Moscow by force, the city is never fully safe, because there's no guaranteed drone strikes on the capital stop at all. Ukraine is running an entirely new warfare doctrine that discards the assumptions traditional air defense was built around. The old model, big, slow, predictable missiles flying single, obvious routes toward a target, is retired. Ukraine's modern long-range drones, including systems like the FP2 and the Lyuchi, are rewriting the rulebook. These fly low enough, skimming just above the treetops, that S-400 radar simply can't pick them up. They run on AI-based terrain-following navigation that's largely immune to electronic jamming. On top of that, Ukraine's heavier night bomber drones, nicknamed Baba Yaga in the field, add another layer of weight to this equation entirely. These are near silent, detectable mainly by infrared and thermal cameras, leaving barely more of a radar signature than a flock of birds on old Soviet-era screens. The FP2 drones specifically, developed under Ukraine's Firepoint program, can carry a 200-kilogram explosive payload out to a range of roughly 370 kilometers. That turns them into cheap, accurate, guided bombs. And Ukraine isn't sending these in one at a time. It's launching them in massive coordinated swarms. Flood the sky with hundreds of drones at once, and Russian radar gets overwhelmed with data and effectively blinded. Pantsir systems, due to their own technical limits, can only lock onto a maximum of 4 targets simultaneously. Send 50 drones at once, and even one of the most expensive, most advanced air defense systems on Earth becomes a helpless spectator. Processors lock up, operators panic, manual guidance errors start happening on live screens in real time. What happened at a Pantsir position tucked into the forest behind the Kapotnya refinery is the clearest proof of exactly how bad that technological helplessness can get. A missile fired in a panicked attempt to intercept an incoming drone missed, and instead struck one of the refinery's own massive fuel tanks due to a serious guidance error. That friendly fire strike sent the tank's giant lid flying like a frisbee and produced a pitch-black mushroom cloud rising straight over the facility. And Ukraine isn't stopping there. It's running a genuinely elegant deception tactic to protect its real strike force. Cheap, harmless decoy drones get mixed directly into these swarms, deliberately flown at high altitude specifically to trigger Russian radar, while expensive Russian missiles get fired rapidly at empty sky chasing those decoys. The real drones, the ones actually carrying explosives, slip through just a few dozen meters off the ground, completely under the radar's field of view. It's a lethal piece of choreography that will probably be taught as a foundational tactical lesson in militaries around the world for years. While radar treats decoys as the real threat and burns through ammunition in seconds, the actual low observable strike drones glide through the resulting chaos and smoke straight to their targets with real precision. Put all of that together, and the steel dome Russia is trying to build over Moscow ends up riddled with holes. Penetrating Putin's air shield is no longer some far-off theoretical challenge for Ukraine. It's an active, aggressive campaign that specifically hunts and preemptively targets the locations of air defense systems themselves. By peeling away the outer rings of that shield layer by layer, Ukraine opens genuine, safe flight corridors straight toward the heart of the city. Drones slipping through those corridors can reach Moscow's most critical facilities without meeting meaningful resistance at all. So even after pulling systems off the front line, Putin still can't stop Ukrainian air attacks entirely. But But this rotation move creates something far more damaging for him, a genuine strategic disaster unfolding simultaneously back on the battlefield. As the air defense umbrella gets pulled toward the capital, exhausted Russian units along the front are left effectively defenseless. Tanks, artillery batteries, entrenched infantry, kilometer-long logistics convoys, all of it becomes open, exposed terrain. And Ukrainian intelligence has clearly been waiting for exactly this mistake to happen. A weakened frontline air defense network gives Ukraine the perfect opening to deploy heavier, more aggressive air assets, especially across the Zaporizhzhia countryside, along the narrow logistics roads feeding Crimea, and inside Donetsk's most intense combat zones. The situation is genuinely spiraling for Russian forces in these sectors. Russian armored assault groups trying to advance along the Pokrovsk axis are left completely exposed in open terrain the moment the protective umbrella above them gets pulled toward Moscow. As of late June, Ukraine had already exploited this exact vulnerability, launching a new attrition strategy built around it. Ukraine's fiber-optic cable-guided FPV kamikaze drones, which can't be stopped by electronic jamming at all, have become the single biggest fear for Russian soldiers in the field. These drones can maneuver directly into trench systems, producing both devastating physical casualties and serious psychological damage. And Ukrainian commanders haven't stopped there. They've systematically targeted Russian ammunition depots and multi-billion-ruble fuel storage sites in the rear. Supply convoys along the vital Novorossiysk highway can no longer move freely because there's no radar coverage left to stop drone strikes coming from above. Air defense radar systems around the Kerch Strait logistics corridor are being hunted down, one at a time. Tank columns running out of fuel are being abandoned outright, left as scrap metal in open terrain. Artillery batteries out of ammunition are falling silent. Russian infantry are being forced to advance with no air cover at all. When an army's logistics get severed at the artery like this, its combat capability collapses, physically and psychologically, towards zero. In that environment, pulling air defense off strategic frontline positions to protect Moscow could genuinely change the direction of this entire war. Putin is violating what might be the single most fundamental rule of military strategy: that command decisions should follow the cold, concrete reality on the ground, not daily political anxiety. Sacrificing your own army's structural integrity to protect a damaged propaganda narrative might be one of the most dangerous mistakes a wartime leader can make. Because every single launcher pulled off the front is, in effect, a psychological victory for Ukraine, both in the capital and at any future negotiating table. Think of it this way: Putin is bailing water out of the flooding lower decks of a sinking ship and pouring that same water straight into the first-class luxury cabins, while the ship keeps sinking deeper every second. Eventually, those luxury cabins go under too, and that reality is terrifying more than just the infantry sitting in frontline trenches. It's reaching the wealthiest people inside the Kremlin's own inner circle. Russian oligarchs are watching in real time as their multi-million-dollar mansions and energy investments become things the state's own army can no longer fully guarantee protection for. The overall momentum of this war has shifted into a completely different dimension. This isn't really a fight over square kilometers of trench line anymore. It's a technological intelligence and strategic chess match. And while Putin is being crushed under the weight of the invincibility myth he spent years building with his own hands, the battlefield is teaching him a genuinely brutal lesson. No matter how brightly Moscow's sky lights up with intercept missiles, the future facing those increasingly defenseless soldiers on the front gets darker with every hour that passes. So here's what's actually worth asking. Could this kind of reckless political weakening of frontline defense end up sparking real unrest inside Russia's own military command structure? And has Ukraine's swarm drone technology, combined with this attrition strategy, permanently rewritten how militaries around the world think about air defense doctrine going forward? If this breakdown gave you something worth thinking about, subscribe to States Report, hit the bell, and drop your take in the comments. Do you think Moscow holds, or does this trade end up costing Putin the front line entirely? See you in the next one.